So after Nahum and Zephaniah, during the same period roughly, we might be able to place Joel. And I say might only because scholars are divided. It's not like Joel doesn't tell us when he wrote, so we're left to guess when he wrote. He may have written during this period between Proto-Isaiah and Deutero-Isaiah. So not knowing when he wrote, because it's possible that he wrote during this period, let's talk about him before we leave this period. We know that Nahum and Zephaniah definitely were during this time period between Proto-Isaiah and Deutero-Isaiah before the exile. Joel, we're not quite sure, but we're going to place him there knowing that he could be placed in another time period as well. We know very little about Joel except that he was the son of Pethuel. How's that for a name? Apart from that, we hardly know anything about him. We could date him to the 7th century, which again is the 600s. Others date him to somewhere between 400 and 350 BC. But since we are not sure, let's move him forward and talk about him now rather than wait till later. 2 sections in the book of the prophet Joel, chapters 1 and 2. Interesting because in Protestant Bibles, there are only 3 chapters, so they divide it differently. As Catholics, we divide it into 4 chapters, so a bit of a difference. The numbers that I put here are for us as Catholics. Protestants in their Bible would have different numbers for the verses. Chapters 1 and 2 talk about in the present, how it is that we're going to see these devouring locusts and a devastating drought. Again, not a happy picture. When that day comes, when God comes, it's going to be like this swarm of locusts coming in and devouring all of our crops so that we're left in the middle of a drought. Is Joel talking about real locusts or metaphorical locusts? It's hard to tell because we know that locusts were a reality back then. And if you were a farmer and planted your crops, you prayed that Yahweh, that God might deliver you from the locusts, because if the locusts come in, got news for you. Not going to be a lot for you to eat come fall. So if he's talking about real locusts, it could be the case that he sees them as a sort of punishment. Remember back to the book of Exodus, there were various plagues. What was one of those plagues? Locust. So it's almost like the book of Exodus is repeating itself. If indeed the book of Exodus were written first. The Bible was not written in the order in which the books are currently contained in the Bible. Chapters 3 to 4 talks about the coming of the Lord, of the Lord's Spirit. So again, it's looking toward the future. On that day when the Lord comes. But is it such a day of wrath? The last 2 chapters talk more about the Lord's Spirit, the Lord's Ruach coming, but how it is that it will be a day of judgment, but also a day of relief from all those things that afflicted us before. Joel is sometimes called the harbinger of the apocalyptic school, simply meaning that back in that time, back in Persia, our Persian neighbors, Zoroastrians that they were, believed in the dualisms that continue to survive to this day. Dualism is when you take anything and you see things as opposites: good, bad, right, wrong, light, darkness. Our Persian ancestors started doing that, so we started stealing from them, right? When Jesus says, I am the light of the world and darkness shall not overcome it, we're falling back on those ancient dualisms. So what's happening here in Joel? He's actually talking about how it is that there's this great conflict between God. If there's a dualism, who's opposite of God? The adversary. Call the adversary whom you will. Our Persian neighbors called that bad god Satan. So how interesting that we have this image, not only of this, our God, Yahweh, but of this opposing force of evil. The Persians believed if there's a good God, then there's got to be a bad God. How did that affect or infect the Jewish thought? That when Jesus appears in the desert, who's there tempting? Satan. That there's this power that's opposite of God, and that creates certain theological challenges for us. Because do you believe that God is all-powerful, or do you believe in other gods? Because essentially what happens is this becomes another god, another power. In the Persian belief system, it was another god. We as Christians say, well, it's not really another god because God is the only God. But then wait a minute, what is Satan doing as part of your belief system? And so it's Joel who sort of looks at our Persian brothers and sisters, this dualistic thought, and says, "Ooh, wait a minute, they have a bad God. Maybe the coming day of the Lord is sort of like that too." Where it's this struggle between the good God, Yahweh, and the bad God. Call that bad God whatever you'd like. Joel, we find Joel in our Christian scriptures, in the Acts of the Apostles, and also in Paul's letter to the Romans. But perhaps just as importantly, all the images that we see in Joel influence later works, like the book of Revelation. Because in the book of Revelation, it's almost like that author read or knew the prophet Joel and stole various ideas. How it was that in the book of Joel, on that day, when God comes, there's going to be this big plague of locusts. Read the book of Revelation, chapter 9, verses 7 and 8. What's happening on that day? Locusts. Great. The question of how one can endure the eclipsed sun and the blood-red moon, did the author of Revelation make that up? We see all that in the book of the prophet Joel. The sickle, we all know what a sickle is. What is a sickle used for? To harvest wheat. So it's this, what the sickle we used to see in the communist countries. It was a symbol of communist countries, the United Soviet Socialist Republic, right? That sickle, a symbol of harvest. If you're the wheat, how's that for a happy symbol? At the end of time, God's going to come and there's going to be a time of harvest. And He's going to separate the weeds from the wheat. That carried over into our Christian scriptures, right? On that day of judgment, God's going to gather in all the crops. He's going to put the wheat over here in the barn, and all of the weeds get burned. The prophet Joel, we see that in the book of Revelations as well. We see a horseman coming in with a sickle. What is that a symbol of? Coming and strike us down. Death, how is death portrayed even today? When we celebrate the new year, right? The old year is often depicted as an old man, or the death of that old man. Life-giving water flowing from the temple. Did the author of the book of Revelation make that up? That's an image that we have back in the prophet Joel. So let's read some of Joel's own words, beginning in chapter 2, verses 1 to 14. An army of locusts, so I'm sure this is going to be a happy scene. Verse 1, blow the trumpet in Zion, sound the alarm on my holy hill. Let all who live in the land tremble, for the day of the Lord is coming. It is close at hand. Sound the trumpets. What do the soldiers do when the enemy is coming? They blow the trumpet. They let everyone know, the enemy's coming, the enemy's coming. What's coming? The day of the Lord. That day, it's coming. It is close at hand. Verse 2, a day of gloom and darkness, a day of clouds and blackness. Have we heard these images before? From Zephaniah and from Nahum? Which is why we study Joel in connection with them, only because some of the themes are so similar. When God comes, it's not going to be a happy day. Like dawn spreading across the mountains, a large and mighty army comes, such as never was in ancient time, for never again, nor ever it will be in ages to come. So like when the sun comes up, the whole land is filled with light. When God comes, what's going to be like? The whole land is going to be filled with darkness. Verse 3. Before them fire devours, behind them a flame blazes. So it's this image of fire and everything being burnt up. Before them the land is like the Garden of Eden, behind them a desert waste. It's like they're riding in to what looks like the Garden of Eden. When they're riding out, what does it look like? It's gone. It's wasted. Nothing escapes them. Number 4, they have the appearance of horses. They gallop along like cavalry. With a noise like that of chariots, they leap over the mountaintop like a crackling fire consuming stubble, like a mighty army drawn up for battle. Skim down at the coming verses. Essentially, that's what's going to happen when God comes. Verse 12, the tone changes. So this day of the Lord is coming, and it's not going to be a happy day. What does verse 12 tell us? Even now declares the Lord, return to me with all your heart. Even though this day of gloom is coming, it's time to turn around. Which is why, on Ash Wednesday, what are the words that we hear? These words from the 2nd chapter of Joel. Turn to me with all your heart. with fasting and weeping and mourning. What should we be tearing? Our clothes? Our garments? No. Rend your hearts. Return to the Lord, for he is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in love. Whoa, that's quite a turn in images. We have this wrathful, vengeful God coming, but got good news for you. If you turn to God and are sorry, what's going to happen? God is merciful. So imagine a person like Jesus being influenced by words like this, right? How it is that, okay, instead of this vengeful image of God, if you turn to God, sinner though you are, prostitute, tax collector, woman, non-Israelite, Samaritan, whoever you are, turn to God, and there's hope of salvation. Verse 14, who knows? God may turn and relent and leave behind a blessing. If you turn to God, instead of this day of wrath, it ends on this hopeful note. If you turn toward God, maybe you'll be spared. How's that for good news?